Okay, so today we're really diving deep. We're looking at this thing called thoughtful conservatism in America. It's not about just like left versus right.
Right.
We're going beyond those simple labels to see how this group actually thinks about the world.
Yeah.
And, from the research we've done, it's a pretty fascinating intellectual tradition with a lot of history behind it.
It's got some really deep roots, that's for sure.
Yeah. And a key figure in this world today, well, one of them at least, is Ross Douthat.
Oh, yeah. He's everywhere these days.
You probably know him from his New York Times column, right? And he's even got this new podcast called Interesting Times, I think.
Yeah, interesting times. It's pretty
Which just kind of shows that this way of thinking, this deeper analysis, it's still really relevant today.
Yeah.
So I guess for you, the listener, what we're aiming for today is to help you understand this intellectual side of conservatism a little better, and particularly how it looks at really complex issues like AI or UAPs. Maybe give you a new way to think about those things.
I mean, I think that's what's so interesting here, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just about following a set of rules.
Yeah.
Like, this is about really engaging with ideas.
Absolutely.
And I guess one way to start is to define what we even mean by thoughtful conservatism. I think one core idea is this emphasis on philosophy, like going deep into ideas instead of just sticking to an ideology.
Right. Yeah. And there's also, well, it seems like there's a real concern about the importance of culture.
Definitely.
Like, shared values, traditions, institutions.
It's about how we live together.
Exactly. And they seem to be saying that culture, that's even more fundamental than politics.
Like, it's the foundation.
Yeah.
Politics comes out of that.
It's like the ground that politics grows out of.
Yeah, exactly. And I think another key part of this way of thinking is a real respect for history.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, they take history very seriously.
Yeah, it seems to inform a lot of what they believe.
It's not about reinventing the wheel every generation.
Right. Yeah.
Like, there's this idea, it's actually from Edmund Burke, about prescription. This idea that, well, it's like inheriting a house, right?
Yeah.
A really well-built house. You might want to update some things, make it your own.
Sure.
But you're not going to rip out the foundation.
Right.
Those foundations have stood the test of time. So there's this kind of caution, a prudence about making really big changes.
It's kind of like a go slow, be careful sort of approach.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And I guess underlying all of this is a certain view of human nature, too.
Right.
You tend to emphasize that we're not perfect, we're flawed. And I think that makes them skeptical of any political system that promises like a utopia.
Yeah, I guess that imperfection is a big part of their thinking.
It leads to a kind of humility,
Yeah.
about what politics can achieve.
It definitely seems to shape their outlook. So let's maybe look back a bit, historically, right?
Sure.
We've got some really big thinkers in the background here, like figures like Edmund Burke. Obviously, we've talked about him.
Right, Burke. And then you have Tocqueville, too. Alexis de Tocqueville.
Yeah, those are like the foundational guys.
Really important figures in this whole tradition.
But then how did things develop from there?
Well, after World War II, there was this interesting fusion happening around National Review, this magazine.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
You had people like Russell Kirk, who really focused on tradition. And then Friedrich Hayek.
Ah, Mr. Free Markets.
Yeah, he brought in these ideas about liberty and free markets. And then you even have Whittaker Chambers.
Who was a
former communist, actually, who became very strongly anti-communist.
Oh, wow.
So it was this interesting mix, right? Tradition, liberty, anti-communism.
That's quite the coalition.
Yeah, it was really influential.
So it sounds like there were always kind of like internal debates going on.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you can't just lump everyone together, right?
Yeah, no, definitely not. And you see that in like the later emergence of things like neoconservatism.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Which often favored a more assertive foreign policy.
Okay.
And then you have paleoconservatism, which really emphasized nationalism.
Right. So there was a lot happening inside this movement.
It was a dynamic space, for sure.
It was. So let's fast forward a bit, right, to Ross Douthat.
Okay, yeah.
Now, he's a modern voice. What are some of his key ideas?
Well, he calls himself a religious conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think his beliefs on things like abortion, those are really central to his worldview.
Right. I mean, that's kind of his starting point.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But then he also looks at like these broader cultural trends.
Okay, like what?
Well, he's got this whole idea about decadence.
What does that even mean?
It's kind of like this sense of stagnation, like things aren't working the way they used to, a kind of cultural exhaustion.
Interesting.
And he talks about bad religion, too, these sort of watered-down forms of faith that have lost their power.
Yeah, so it's not just about politics for him, right?
No, it's about how we live, what we believe. And, you know, one thing that's really interesting about Dathad is he's been arguing for a conservatism that really focuses on working-class people.
Okay, that's different.
It's a shift in emphasis.
It is.
And it's also important to remember he's been pretty critical of Trump.
Oh, yeah, he hasn't exactly been shy about that.
He's looking for a different kind of conservatism, a different future for the movement.
Right. So let's get into how all of this way of thinking applies to some specific issues, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's start with AI. How do these thoughtful conservatives view artificial intelligence?
Well, I think you see a lot of concern about bias in algorithms,
Mm-hmm.
like in facial recognition software
Mm.
or even hiring algorithms.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And there's also a lot of focus, especially from groups like the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, on how technology like smartphones
Oh, right.
might be affecting families and children.
I guess that makes sense from their perspective.
Yeah, it goes back to that concern about culture and values.
Absolutely. So it seems like there's this tension here
Yeah, there is.
between this desire for progress and innovation,
Right.
but also this real caution about its impact
Exactly.
on our values, on society as a whole.
And you see that in how they approach this whole issue of bias in AI.
Yeah, how so?
Well, some are really focused on systemic inequalities,
Mm-hmm.
like how AI might perpetuate existing biases.
Right.
But then others are more concerned about what they see as a kind of ideological bias in tech.
Like a woke bias.
Yeah, that's the term they often use.
So it's complicated. Like so much of this is,
Absolutely.
okay, well, how about UAPs? What about unidentified aerial phenomena? How does this group view that whole thing?
Well, I think a really big concern for them is government transparency.
Oh, makes sense.
They're really skeptical of secrecy.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of fits with their general outlook.
And we've seen this play out with people like Senator Schumer and Rounds,
Oh, yeah, they've been pushing for more information.
Exactly. They're really pushing for the government to be more open about what they know about UAPs.
It's a big issue for them, for sure.
And there's also a big focus on the credibility of whistleblowers.
Like that David Grush guy, right?
Exactly.
The one who's been saying all sorts of stuff about, secret government programs.
Right. And they really pay attention to people like him, people with military backgrounds, pilots who are coming forward.
I mean, I guess it makes sense. If you're going to believe anyone, you'd believe someone with, that kind of background.
It lends a certain weight, for sure.
It does. But it's not all about, cover-ups and conspiracies.
No, definitely not.
They're thinking about the big picture too, right?
I mean, national security is obviously a huge concern.
Yeah.
But there are also these bigger philosophical questions, right?
Okay, like what?
Like, what does it mean if we really are dealing with non-human technology?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It challenges our whole view of, humanity's place in the universe.
It's kind of humbling, right?
It is, in a way.
So, we've been talking about all these ideas, all this thinking, but where is this actually happening? Where are these discussions taking place?
Well, you have a whole kind of media ecosystem around this. Journals like First Things,
Yeah.
the Claremont Review of Books,
I've heard of some of those, yeah.
National Affairs, the American Conservative,
Okay.
and, of course, Dathad's own podcast that we mentioned earlier.
So I guess this is where a lot of the intellectual heavy lifting is happening.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because this is a bit different from, the more populist conservative media.
Right, like the Daily Wire, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The style's different, the audience is different, even the goals are different.
Yeah, it's not about getting the most clicks, right?
Not necessarily. It's more about shaping the conversation among thinkers and leaders.
So they might not have the biggest audience,
No.
but their ideas can still have a big impact.
I think that's a really important point. They're often punching above their weight in terms of influence.
It's fascinating, really. Well, I guess to kind of sum it all up, it seems like what we're calling thoughtful conservatism offers a pretty unique way of understanding the world.
It does.
A historically grounded perspective that you don't always hear in the mainstream.
I mean, we see how thinkers like Dowd use this lens to analyze everything,
Yeah, he's a good example.
from the ethics of AI to the mysteries of UAPs.
Mhm.
It's a way of thinking that raises some really important questions.
It does, and it gives you a lot to think about. So I guess this brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, right?
Right.
Given everything we've talked about today, about these intellectual currents within conservatism.
Yeah.
How might understanding this perspective change your own view of what's happening in the world?
Hmm.
Of all the big challenges we're facing and how we think about the future, not just of conservatism, but of everything, really.
Yeah, it's a different way of looking at things.
What really struck you about their analysis of AI or UAPs? What makes you want to, dive in deeper and learn more?
That's the question.
That's the question.